Hey everybody, and welcome back to my channel. It's Leanne here, and this is another resin video in our resin beginner series. Now this one's going to be pretty simple. We're just going to embed some of these fluffy miniature pom-poms in resin today and make really basic heart-shaped keyrings that you could replicate easily. Now I got these pom-poms on eBay and they were not very expensive, and I've seen them on AliExpress and Amazon. I'm going to be using a silicone mold today, and the supplies I need is a measuring spoon, a little silicone pot for mixing my resin, and a stirring spoon. And my resin is a 1 and 1 variety. That means you put equal amounts of part A and equal amounts of part B. The resin in this video is Master Cast 121, but from the next video onward I'm going to be using Let's Resin for a few videos as I road test it and try out a new resin. So for this resin I have to preheat the first part of my resin because it is quite thick, so I did that off camera there. I just preheat it in a microwave for about 8 seconds when I'm using small amounts, and it turns it into very liquidy resin. It means I will get no bubbles. But you have to work with your own resin. If you know how to make sure your resin is bubble free, then follow the steps that you would always follow. But like me, if you have a thicker resin that is sometimes prone to very many bubbles, preheating one part of the resin works amazingly well. As you can see, it's really liquidy, and when I add the cold part B to it and mix it, it gets rid of pretty much all the bubbles very quickly. You don't need to do this if you have a really thin water clear resin or a resin that gets rid of bubbles itself upon standing. But like I said, I've had this resin for a while now, and it's probably thicker due to age as I'm trying to use it all up, and it needs a little bit of help to get rid of the bubbles. Okay, so once I have my resin ready and completely mixed, I make sure I stir it until all the traces of resin have completely disappeared in the liquid. You'll see what look like ribbony streaks through your resin if it is not completely mixed properly. I'm only putting a shallow amount in the bottom of the mold because we're actually going to be adding resin with the pom-poms. Now I'm going to use some tweezers here. These are just craft tweezers, and I'm going to pick up my pom-poms one by one, and I'm going to submerge them in my mixed resin to make sure I get a good coverage. It lets any air bubbles out, and then I'm going to place them into my mold. This is why you only need a shallow layer, because you're adding resin with every pom-pom. And I'm just going to go through that, picking out the colours that I want, pushing them together quite well, making sure they're nestled in there. And this just stops you putting any extra air bubbles in your resin with dry pom-poms, or the pom-poms sucking up the resin and leaving dry air bubbles from the underneath of the mold where you wouldn't be able to see it. Just avoids all of that. So I'm just putting mine in rows of the same colour, going from a dark colour all the way to a light colour. I was going for a bit of an ombre with this one, and I squeeze in the last one. As you can see, that brings the resin pretty much to the top of the mold, just with the extra resin we've added. If you find you have too much resin, you can take your little stir stick and scoop some out. You don't really want to overflow your mold because it's harder to do clean up and the back of your mold later. So now I'm taking my tweezers and I'm just giving the pom-poms a little squish to make sure any trapped air comes to the surface from the center of the pom-poms. I'm kind of moving them around a little bit and just making sure, as you can see, those little bubbles that are coming to the surface, it's all being released just from giving the pom-poms a squish. I really love pom-poms as a background idea, and because this is a flat mold, I'm just going straight in with my background because I'm going to add stickers to the front of it in a little while. But if you have a curved mold like this blue one here, you could first add your sticker layer into your mold before you do any backgrounds or whatever you're putting in the front. But I wanted to leave this heart with just pom-poms, so I added nothing. It was a dirty mold, there was already glitter around the edge, and I thought it would make a cool effect if instead of cleaning the mold, I just went in with the pom-poms. So it's the same exact thing. I put in a layer of resin and then I soaked my pom-poms and put them in. Now this is not as deep a mold, so as you can see the pom-poms are sticking out the back a little bit on the heart one, but I'm going to cover that later when we do my background because I kind of like the look. So I let that cure overnight, as you can see. This one with the pom-poms fully embedded turned out pretty cool. There's a couple of little imperfections on the front of my heart, but I think that might be the mold, and this is the one that I did in the heart. Now I'm going for stickers with my little flat one here because it's really easy to add a sticker and dome the front of a flat piece. I actually prefer it than trying to get the stickers on in the mold first. It does make the piece a little bit thicker, but as this is going to be a keyring, I actually want it to be a little bit on the thicker side. It makes it stronger, less likely to break when it's being bounced around on a set of keys. So I'm adding my sticker straight to the front of that heart piece, just where I want it. And I'm going to then lay that aside. And we are going to dome the top of this to seal that sticker in. Now you could do this with UV resin, but I tend to do everything with normal epoxy resin. And we're going to work on the back first here. I'm just going to give the back of the edge a little sand just to make sure everything's flat and smooth. You don't want any sticky up bits or unevenness when you come to dome the back. You want to make sure the back's nice and perfectly flat before you even dome the front, because if it's lying on the back and it's uneven, then your front dome is going to be uneven too. So these are just nail files for doing general acrylic nails. You can get these on eBay or Amazon, and I just hold the file flat to it and run across until everything's nice and smooth. Now to clean out my little cups, I just turn them inside out, peel off the dried resin from the last time I used them, and then I take a baby wipe and I use baby wipes to clean off the rest of the resin. It means that I'm no longer using disposable cups, and I have a few of these little silicone cups that I reuse for my resin almost every day, and they clean up so easily with this method. You just turn it the right way back and you're ready to go again. So I'm going to mix up a very small amount of my resin for doming. As you can see, I'm going to a smaller measuring spoon. These are just baking measuring spoons. I have them in many different sizes. They're not the cleanest, but when you work with resin, you kind of get used to things getting a bit grubby, especially if, like me, you teach other people in your home how to do resin, and sometimes your children help, and things don't always get cleaned properly. So I'm making a very small amount, but I'm not going to preheat my resin with this because it is such a shallow layer that I'm going to be doing on my piece. I am just mixing it up regular. It's going to have bubbles in it, but we're going to remove the bubbles from the actual layer when we dome it, which is easier to do when it's thin because you can do it in a couple of different ways. I'm just cleaning off my measuring spoon with a baby wipe there so that it's ready for the next use. I'm going to mix up my resin. You want to make sure you mix your resin properly. Unmixed resin can actually result in sticky pieces of resin that don't cure properly in places, or can cause little imperfections. I'm just gently heating up my resin a little bit here with my heat tool. It's on the lowest setting, and I'm keeping it at a decent distance. I'm not trying to bubble up my resin. I'm just adding some slight heat to disperse some of those bubbles. It just warms it slightly. I don't want this resin too thin when you're doming, so I wouldn't preheat it like I did with the first step because it would just run off the edges of my piece. I want to leave some of that thickness. Now when I'm doming, I take a very small amount in the middle and I spread it out to every edge using the back of my little spoon here. And now resin is self-leveling, which means if you do this first, there's less chance of you having overpour by chucking on a ton of resin. I then drip small amounts into the center areas of my piece and let them self-level until I'm happy with how high the dome is. And that's usually the way I dome everything, and I very rarely get spillages. If you overpour onto your little piece, you will get it running down the side, so just be aware of that. And I used my torch here to get rid of bubbles, and as you saw there, resin can be very temperamental, and if you get the flame too close, you can sometimes cause flames. You don't want that. So keep your little torch at a distance, or use a heat gun, or better yet, use a spray with some rubbing alcohol, because that works exceptionally well. So I'm bringing back my other heart piece here. Now this is the one where you see the pom-poms are raised out of the resin, and the reason I left them like that is because I want to show you when you add a back colour with the pom-poms like this, from the front it will look like the pom-poms are actually nestled into the colour behind, rather than that they were done in two separate layers. With the one on the left, when I add the back colour, you can see the pom-poms will sit in front of the colour, whereas on the heart one, the pom-poms will sit in the colour. I'm using a little of Let's Resin alcohol inks here just to tint my resin a shade that matches the pom-poms. And I'm just going to do the same thing, apply a thin layer to the back of my heart and then dome it slightly. I felt that my resin was a little bit too transparent and I wanted more of an opaque colour, so I've added just some of the alcohol ink in white. Not only does it lighten the colour, but it makes it less transparent. And I'm just using very small amounts of the ink. So I'm just going to do the same and spread out this colour. Now I'm not going for a thick doming layer on this one. This is purely just to fill up where those little pom-poms are sticking out and provide a flatter surface for me to add my bezel. I'm not trying to dome it extremely thickly, and just trying to level it out so it's a bit flatter. I find with shaped molds like this, it tends to be more likely that they run off the edge, especially in hearts, the little V shape at the top. Resin tends to want to run down there quite often, so just be really careful when you're doming the back of a heart piece or anything that has like cutouts in the shape, as that is where the resin is most likely to overpour and run down the front of your piece. So try not to overdome when you do the resin. Okay, I'm just adding the last bits of resin to that. As you can see, it's smoothed out the back. The pom-poms are now completely submerged, and I'm just getting rid of the air bubbles once again. Now I'm going to leave them for about an hour. Oh sorry, I must have come back when they were completely cured and not added any bales to the back of these. So this is them after they have the back and the dome in front completely cured. I'm just making sure the back of this is completely flat because we're going to be doing the back of this one. And I must have decided to redome the back of the red one for some whatever reason. I'm watching this back and I'd edited this a few days ago, so it didn't make any sense to me why I let that cure completely, but now it does. I must have decided to add a second layer. So I'm cleaning off my little silicone cup there the same way I showed you before. You just take a wet wipe or a baby wipe and you rub over, picking up all the traces of the resin on the little cup. It just takes seconds. Turn it the right way out and you're ready to go again. Back to my littlest measuring spoon. I think it's 1/4 teaspoon, this one. And back to my 1/2 and 1/2 resin. I have a whole array of baking spoons going right up to a 1/2 cup measurement for really big projects, and this is literally how I measure my resin for every single project. Now if you feel like that's not enough resin, you can do what I did here and double up the amount of spoons that you put in. If you don't have a 1/2 teaspoon or something the right measurement, I just double up the amount of spoons that I put in. Then you scrape out your little spoon and you stir it again. Now these little spoons that I'm using, the pink one, these are actually coffee stirring spoons. I got a box of 50 on, I think it was eBay or AliExpress, for only a couple of pounds, and I use the same spoon over and over and over. I just clean them off with a baby wipe. So I'm only throwing them away once in a blue moon. And they're absolutely great for things like picking up glitter or mixing resin or just generally using it as a resin tool. I like the fact that they come in lots of colours, and sometimes you'll see me in videos using different colours, but I tend to not throw these away. They're great for so many purposes. Okay, for this doming layer I'm going to use some acrylic paint rather than alcohol ink. You can do this if you don't have alcohol ink or you don't have resin pigment. The thing with acrylic paint is you must use the bare minimal though, a tiny little drop. You don't want to put too much acrylic paint in resin because it can affect how it cures and it can make it quite rubbery as well. You want to keep it basic, but as you can see, that tiny little scoop of acrylic paint made quite a pretty semi-opaque, and I quite like that. The fact that it's slightly transparent means that I can now add glitter to that, and you will see the glitter through the paint and not be completely obscured. So off to get my glitter. I like putting a little bit of sparkle in everything I do, using another one of those spoons to scoop out some glitter. And that's just a mix that I made a long time ago that has some slight little speckles of other colours in, but overall it's mainly an iridescent white. So I mix that in really well, and I don't need to worry about bubbles if I'm adding glitter and colour to a piece because they tend to not show. And then the same again, a little drizzle on the piece to be able to spread it out to the edges. Now this is my final layer on these little pieces, so I'm going to use this layer to actually attach my bezel in a little while. This is where I thought I was with the last step, but I obviously decided to go in on that heart and add an extra layer. So I'm just spreading out my resin, adding some extra until it's domed as much as I want it to be. You can see it's spreading out and self-leveling. And I wanted it to be a little bit higher, so I'm just very carefully adding drips at a time until it's the level that I want. Just be mindful, the more resin that you pile on top when you do a doming, the more likely it will overflow and spill, so just keep an eye on it for the first maybe 20 minutes as it's beginning to cure, and watch for any overspills, so while it's still wet you are more capable of cleaning it up. So I'm adding my glitter to my heart as well. I kept the red very, very thin, so I pretty much have a flat surface to apply this glitter layer on top of. And what this does is also covers up any of those little bits of pom-pom that might still be protruding through that layer, and just gives it a more finished look on the back. I spread it out fully, and then I'm just adding my resin a little bit at a time until I build up the dome that I want. As you can see, I'm dripping it all over rather than in one spot, so it disperses faster. Making sure it's all the way to the edges. Sometimes with resin pieces, the resin has a tendency to pull back away from the edges when it's a large piece. So you have to pull it back out and add a little bit more resin. That's sometimes a good pointer as to whether you've got enough resin as a doming layer. If the resin's still pulling away from the edges, you just need to add a little bit more, which was the case on this heart one. It just needed a little bit more resin for a good dome. And then once I'm happy with that, I'm just going to put them aside for an hour and use that leftover resin in another mold. Okay, so this is me coming back after an hour when the resin is tacky and sticky but not anywhere near cured, as you can see. And I'm just going to stick my bezel straight on top of the sticky tacky resin. Now it's thick enough that it will stay on top mainly, but it will sink down enough that it will create a secure bond to your resin piece. As you can see, it's kind of like a soft toffee, and you just want to nestle your bezels in there on top very gently. And then I'm applying some alcohol spray just to get rid of any surface bubbles. I don't want to add heat at this point because it'll make the resin liquid and it's more likely to sink. As you can see, the bezel on this one did sink somewhat, but there's no spillage from the bezels sinking because I waited until the pieces were tacky. And this is the leftover resin from that little cup that I could now stick a sticker to and turn into another keyring. As you can see, I could even paint on that, and that would have 2 more. So this was the 2 really basic keyrings there that I'm throwing away. There is the love one, well, the XOXO one, with just the pom-poms fully embedded in the resin in a clear layer, and then the heart that had the glitter around the edge. Okay, so that was it for this little lesson in making really simplistic resin pieces for keyrings, and I will catch you in the next video. The next video I have coming up will be a Let's Resin video as we revisit the Petri dish method using Let's Resin products, Let's Resin alcohol inks, and their own brand of resin, and some new molds they sent me. So I'll see you in the next video. Have a nice day. I hope you're staying safe and staying well, and I will see you next time. Thanks. Bye.